Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Carrie Chapman
and me, Toba Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
To Saturday night's Constitutional Chat. I'm Cathy Gillespie, and I'm co-president of Constituting America, and I'd like to introduce everyone who is with us tonight. First, I'd like to introduce our founder and co-president, the actress Janine Turner. Now, Janine is best known for her role as Maggie O'Connell in the TV show Northern Exposure. She's an Emmy and 3-time Golden Globe nominated actress. Janine is an author, and she is the creative energy and leader of Constituting America, and I love working with her every day. And Janine always likes to say it takes 2 wings of an eagle to fly, and she is one wing and I'm the other wing, and that's how we get everything done that we get done with Constituting America. So Janine, thank you so much for all you do. Say hi.
Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm moving, sort of. My New York City apartment, I had to close it, and it's all arrived. So hence we've decided this is the Meg Ryan look here. And I'm wearing sunglasses at night because I don't have any makeup on. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
We also have on our panel with us Toba Kaplan. Toba is 16 years old and lives in Chicago, Illinois. She currently serves as the National Youth Director for Constituting America and runs the National Youth Advisory Board. Tova is a 3-time winner of the We the Future contest in the entrepreneurial, where she created a marketing plan, PSA, where she created a little PSA entitled Know Your Rights, Read the Constitution, and STEM, where she created an app. Tova is passionate about educating and empowering young people to use their constitutional rights. Tova, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
And we also have with us Dakare Chatman, who is our Constituting America Student Ambassador. Dakare is 17 years old and is currently a junior full-time college student in South Carolina. He's won Constituting America's We the Future contest twice, once for Best PSA, where he reminded viewers the Constitution is an American thing, so know it. And I might add that we've made billboards of that slogan that are very popular in Texas, that Dakare, with the slogan that Dakare designed. And Dakare also won for his short film, which was a man on the street interview. Dakare is actively involved in our National Youth Advisory Board. He's a working actor and seen most recently in HBO's The Righteous Gemstones and in Netflix Outer Banks, and that came out just 2 months ago. Dakare's also recently booked a movie that we're all very excited about. Dakare wishes to be an actor, but also a politician. But Dakare says you must be an actor to be a politician. Dakare, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. We're so glad you're here, and we hope you enjoy our constitutional chat tonight. And remember that it's an American thing, so know it.
Our very special guest is Professor Wilfred Bill McClay. Professor McClay is the G.T. and Libby Blankenship Chair in the History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma. He's a member of the U.S. Commission on the Semiquincentennial, which has been charged with the planning of the celebration of our nation's 250th birthday in the year 2026. Professor McClay has been the recipient of fellowships from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Academy of Education. He's a graduate of St. John's College in Annapolis and received his PhD in history from the Johns Hopkins University. Professor McClay is the author of many books, including Land of Hope, An Invitation to the Great American Story, and I might add, Professor McClay wrote the opening essay for Constituting America's 90-day study that is going on this year on important dates in American history. Professor McClay's essay was entitled, Recovering Our Legacy, the Many Uses of the American Past. And that is a great jumping off point to go to Professor McClay. And I think he's got some opening comments for tonight's topic.
Thank you, Cathy, and thanks to you and Janine and Lisa and everybody who run this organization. It's a wonderful thing. It's much needed. You know, we have a great treasure in our Constitution, the world's oldest Constitution, and yet we don't appreciate it. And you mentioned Constitution Day. I've been involved for 10 years or more in really pushing for the idea that we ought to celebrate Constitution Day as much as we celebrate the 4th of July. I mean, lots of countries have their Independence Day, but not many countries, not any countries, have the world's oldest Constitution. So that's something we ought to be very pleased about, proud of, and protective of. So I think we ought to recognize it more, and I thank you. You guys are doing great stuff, and keep doing it. Let me make a few remarks to kick off our discussion tonight, because this is an issue that it's kind of engulfing us at the moment, and I want to make a distinction at the outset. I don't think we want to have a discussion about whether, you know, the unlawful desecration or removal of statues is or is not desirable. I think let's not go there. I think we're really concerned with the more limited question of, is it appropriate to edit the past in the way that many people are seeking to do? Is it, you know, after all, we call these monuments, statues, we call them memorials. And the word memorial contains the word memory. They are a tangible, physical expression of our memory together, not our memory as individuals, but our public memory, our memory as a people. And that doesn't, you know, solve the problem of what we should and what we shouldn't have on display. But it's something to keep in mind that anytime you take away something that in the present moment is viewed as undesirable, in a past time was perhaps not, you ought to consider what you're doing. You ought to consider, you know, there's, I mean, a wonderful example that comes to mind is when Stalin came to power and had to eliminate his rival Trotsky in the old Soviet Union. He went around deleting Trotsky's image, you know, photoshopping, as it were, his image out of famous photographs where the two men were together. That's a manipulation of the past, of memory itself, in order to serve the interests of the president and of a powerful person in the present, a person who sought to be all powerful. So, you know, again, I'm not saying that we're doing anything like that here necessarily, but I think we ought to be very wary of edits of the process of editing the past that we see going on. So what I want to throw out for discussion here is the question of when is it appropriate to engage in this kind of editing of the past? What principles should we follow in doing so? What degree of deference do we owe to the past? That's something Americans often don't think we have much of any deference to the past. I think that's a shame. And certainly for those of us who are constitutionalists, we show deference to the fundamental rule of law that we adopted in the 1780s. So what degree of deference do we show to the past in maintaining the memorials, the embodied memories that the past sought to create and establish? Edmund Burke said that society is a contract between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. It's a beautiful image of the way in which we owe debts. We, the living, owe debts both to those who came before us and those who will come after. I see what Cathy and Janine are doing is very much directed towards that last part, towards what we owe to those to come. And we owe them their legacy, their full legacy as Americans. So what do we owe the past? What do we owe to the future? And what do we owe to the present? That is to the truths as we see them at the present, which emerge, which evolve. We have evolved as a country, that's for sure. Has that evolution rendered some of the memorials of the past things that we ought to edit out of our public language, our public discourse. So that's where I think I'd like to kind of urge the discussion to go in that sort of direction.
There's so many issues in regard to this, and you said something about erasing the memory, memorial, the memory, and I think that when we have an episode, we need the memories in our country that were not perfect, because that's how we see how we've overcome. That's how we see that we've stair-stepped up. And there's been this comparison lately to the Cultural Revolution in communist China, where they started erasing everything. I did a movie in communist China in 1980, and there was a gentleman who was on the set with me who had lived through the revolution.
Huh.
And he talked about how they lost how different everything was, and they lost all memory of the past because everything was wiped out. And how dangerous that is. It's I don't know how you convince someone though that looks at a statue and feels like it's demeaning, and how you switch this thought process that's escalating in America to say it's not, it may be demeaning, but it's part of look how far, it's part of our history, and it's how far we've come. I don't know how we gel that where people can feel comfortable with, I don't know, there seems to be people want to erase history if they don't like it, instead of seeing history and saying, look at what we've learned, look, we did make mistakes, but look at how we've overcome them. But there doesn't seem to be a synchronicity with those thoughts out there. And I don't know how, if I were to be having a conversation with someone who's adamant about taking a statue down because it's offensive, how would you even begin to have that conversation to explain, other than what we're saying? Look, I don't know, it's just a tricky situation. How would you have a conversation with someone about?
Well, what I would do, and I'd be interested in what others of you think about this, is try to, first of all, make the point that that the meaning that you attribute, that this person we're talking to, okay, this really fanatically opposed person, the meaning you attribute to that statue is not necessarily the meaning everybody attributes. And let me switch it around a little bit to make that point. Something like the Confederate flag, the battle flag, the one that I think a great many people find offensive. I certainly can remember, and all of us have seen the Dukes of Hazzard, when that flag was viewed in popular culture as innocuous, as a kind of sort of a symbol of rebelliousness, of rambunctiousness. What you want to do is patiently explain to someone, hey, that may be true, that may be the way you look at it, but have you considered the way it looks to other people, particularly African Americans, who see this as a symbol of a very dark, difficult past? I think you can flip it the other way. same, that in tearing down a statue of, let's say, Robert E. Lee, or let's say Thomas Jefferson. Let's take Thomas Jefferson, I think, right off the bat, because Thomas Jefferson is a very mixed bag. But I would defend keeping the Jefferson Memorial. I don't think it's going anywhere, but I think there are places where they're pulling down his statue and illegally, and I think we agree it shouldn't be done that way. There was a discussion in Charlottesville, of course, in 2017 about taking down the Jefferson statue. And my view of this is that local communities, through a deliberative process, can make that choice. The question we want to talk about is, should they? And I think in the case of Jefferson, again, this is just my view, and I don't want to lord it over everybody, because this is the kind of thing we as citizens need to decide. But Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, which we'll be talking about next week. These are words that have illuminated all of our history. They have illuminated the history of the whole world. In Hong Kong, when just months ago, before that movement was suppressed by the Chinese government, they were carrying around copies of the Declaration of Independence and little models of the Statue of Liberty. We've seen it again and again, that Thomas Jefferson is in a way a hero to the world, and not just the United States. And so I think and I'm not just saying, oh, well, he had slaves, no big deal, it is a big deal. And particularly with him, because he opposed slavery. He recognized the evil of slavery. He wrote about it. And yet, in his own life, he didn't come across and manumit his slaves, as George Washington did when he died. I mean, I think that this is a very complicated man. We see him on a pedestal, but in fact, he's more interesting than that, and struggled in all sorts of ways that I think, even though we don't struggle with the issue of slavery, at least I don't think we do, that the wrongness, the evil of slavery, I think is something that we all accept without question. But that doesn't mean that he didn't leave us something, give us a legacy. That's something very, very precious and powerful, even though he's a deeply flawed individual.
I want to move on to let someone ask a question, but as you were speaking, what dawned on me is that what I would say, because hearing you speak, it gelled in my mind. What I would say to someone who wants to tear a statue down is, we have a constitution, we have the amendment process, we have a legislature and a presidency, and we have we can reason, we can discuss, we can talk. Let's go about this without actually tearing a statue down. Let's have a group conscience, yes. And it may still come down, but we don't have to tear it down. But let's use the law of the land. Let's use our reason. Let's use the Declaration of the Constitution and elements of the government to let that happen. I'm going to go to Dakare next. Dakare, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you, Professor McClay. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is a really, I will say, different topic for us to discuss, during this time and everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. But something that dawned on me when you were talking was, I was talking to my grandmother about this, and she's very, wise. She's always telling me stuff, and she said, when people get angry about something, they, do whatever they can to make it, to cure their anger, basically. But she said, what is taking down a statue gonna do? And that's what I think. I'm like, what is that gonna do for me? what peace of mind is that going to give me? But I also think that there are some things that just need to come down. There are some things that are, let's be real here. There are some things that are up that just have no right being up. But I like what Janine said. Here in Charleston, John C. Calhoun, who's one of our vice presidents, they had a huge statue of him in Charleston, and it was just removed, but it was removed the correct way. They did it lawfully, they used the law, and the mayor had it removed. So I think that when we talk about the removal of these statues and the removal of these different historical things, if you remove one thing, you have to remove another thing, because, like they just removed John C. Calhoun, and here in Charleston now there's people saying they need to remove Denmark Vesey, his statue. So it's just everything, like one thing sparks another thing, and I think our country's just really in unrest, kind of, sort of, and it's like one thing just sparks another thing, and I guess my question for you, because this is more of a discussion, but I guess my question for you would be, how do they make everybody happy? Because again, like Grammy says, that'll never happen.
Well, she's a wise woman. I agree. She says that. But I think part of the problem, you said, what good, sort of the what good does that do? That's a great question. I think we're very much hung up on symbols. And when you're playing around with symbols, you're playing with something dangerous, because you don't know. That's my point, was about the Confederate flag. You don't know that just because it symbolizes one thing to you, that there's maybe a whole lot of other people that don't talk about it, but that for them it's a very wounding thing. But it is a symbol. It doesn't improve. It isn't going to improve anybody's life, really, in a material way, in a sense of giving them a sense of dignity and hope and optimism and a leg up in the future. To say you can't fly the Confederate flag over your house anymore. I don't disagree with doing that, and I think it's part of our becoming a more civil society to have that ability to think ourselves into other people's perspective and other people's condition, how they see it. But at the same time, pulling down a statue of Lincoln in Boston, which is now they're doing that. In fact, the mayor, I think, has approved it under political pressure. This is not going to help anybody. This isn't going to do it. It's a manipulation of symbols, but in manipulating the symbols, there's always a chance that all you're producing is resentment. I think of. I should have looked this up, but there was a great interview that Charles Barkley did a while back on this subject, and he said, I've been in New Orleans. This was when they were debating removing the statue of Robert E. Lee that's in New Orleans. He said, I spent a lot of time in New Orleans. I've never thought, and he used somewhat more earthy language than I'm going to use in this, but I've never given any thought to those things. And in a way, we by elevating these symbols to being the objects of our conflict with one another, we may be causing more trouble, as you were talking about, Dakare.
I'm jump in here and let someone else ask a question, but it's interesting to me when I think about Congress and how we could be dealing with these issues through Congress, and because you said, Professor McClay, that it may build resentment. So there's resentment from people that are taking it down. Why hasn't something been done? It hasn't been done. Why are we having to do it? And then there's resentment from people watching all these statues being ripped down, thinking, wait a minute, where aren't they going to be held accountable? I mean, are they going to be arrested? Can anyone now just go tear something down. So it's building a resentment from people who see the lawlessness and say, wait a minute, who's in control here? So just one sec. So I think what's happening is our Congress, you know, because the Senate just passed something and they're playing political games, and the legislature says that's not going to work and they're playing political games. And as long as we have this political divide, you know, Republican, Democrat, and they don't come together to solve the issue, they are perpetuating this sort of ambivalence and anger from both sides, because they can't seem to get it together to come up with a legislation in the way that it should be done. It should be done through the Constitution. And they're not getting it done because they're playing games, which feeds all this mob passion and furor on both sides. Okay, so I want you to make our answers a little bit quicker so that everyone can get another round of questions in. Cathy or Tova, who's burning to go next? Tova. So Tova's hand went up first. Okay, Tova.
So my question, it's I guess a more general question, but how do we make sure that we're making a distinction between remembering history and in the way that we realize that we have a deeply flawed past, but we're remembering it so that we can move forward as a country? How do we make a distinction between that and glorifying that very, you know, troublesome past? And one thing I'd just like to put out there, I've been doing a little research, and I read an article about how the vast majority of Confederate monuments were actually put up between the 1890s and the 1950s, which was the segregation era, not the Civil War era. In which case, what that indicates to me is that might not be history itself in those statues, but a way of glorifying that history in the eyes of the, you know, the generations after, as a way of trying to glorify that. And I also read that, you know, there's Confederate monuments in, I think, 31 states, which anyone who studies history knows there were way less than 31 Confederate states. So it seems to me, on some level, a lot of statues were being built in places that history wasn't there, in a time where that history wasn't happening. So I'm not trying to drive the conversation one way or another, but I was wondering if you could reflect on that and see if we can make a distinction between statues that glorify that past and statues that simply remember it as a way to move forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's a very, very powerful point against, you know, all over the South. You see every little town has a statue to Robert E. Lee or whatever. And yes, a lot of those were written in the Jim Crow era, or were erected in the Jim Crow era. So the you know, the intentionality behind them is something I think we want to look at. I don't know that absolutely decides the case, though, whether they should be taken down or not. Because part of what happens with public art, public statuary, public memorials, is that, you know, the artist puts it up there, but then it becomes something that's meaningful to the people who live there. And so it becomes important also to consult them, and not just to say, when the guys in 1890s, they were segregationists, they were racist, they had this sort of the South shall rise again ideology motivating the doing of this, and therefore it should all go. And you know, maybe that's right. Maybe that's right. But I think there's another factor that, and this goes back to the question of if I just wanted to say this to Janine, that it's really to amplify her point, that we had, you know, the murder, if I can call that, of George Floyd is what set off an awful lot of this. But what has happened is we've really forgotten about. I mean, to a large extent, we're not focused on the issue of policing in particularly urban minority communities and the problems, very real problems there, that the outrage of what happened to George Floyd. When we're talking about pulling down statues of Abraham Lincoln, that's changed the subject in a way that doesn't do, it actually does, it takes the focus away from the problem we really need to solve, in my opinion. You had something you wanted to say, Dakare.
Well, I just was thinking about another one of those Grammy quotes. Grammys, another one of Grammy's quotes. I mean, thinking about George
You're
Floyd.
such a showbiz guy.
I just, you know, she also tells me, you know, it's not going to bring him back. I mean, it's sad that it happened. It really is. And we're going to have to move forward. And these statues that are up that need to be down are just going to have to be down and put in a museum, and people can go look at them if they, you know, need to or whatever. But everything we're doing is not going to bring back George Floyd. And it's sad, but we have to move on. We have to move on. Yeah. And I feel like right now we're just really we're flatlining almost, like we're kind of stagnant. But I definitely think that, like Tova said, there are some monuments that are they're just glorified. I mean, you walk through Greensboro, North Carolina, and you see, you know, stuff about Jefferson Davis and things like that. And it's stuff that shouldn't be up. So those things, yeah, take them down. But there's other things that, like you said, like the Lincoln Memorial or you know, those are things just memorializing our past presidents and founders and people who did things for the country. Those stay. Others that are, you know, don't need to be there, I think need to go.
Well, let me ask you.
Interesting, Dakare. What you said, Dakare, that's interesting is put them in a museum. And the thing is, if they're not ripped down, okay, then you can take them and put them in a museum where people can learn about the actual history. This is what this person did. This is what they did that's wrong. This is how they failed and lost the war, but it's a part of our fabric of our history, you know, but they don't have to be necessarily in the street to be glorified in the town square or in the circle or whatever. But if you tear them down, you don't have the opportunity to take, you're erasing history. And if we erase history, we can't learn from history. We learn, what I've learned in my life is we learn from I learn from my mistakes. You know, it's the most difficult times that I learn the most, and it's my mistakes and our great mistake of slavery in this country and in the Civil War that we fought. And how we've worked continuously to be a better and better. If we don't want to lose that memory and history, because then we lose how we evolved. But a museum is a good place, Dakare. But if they rip it down, we can't put them in museums. Cathy, go ahead.
Well, we've got some great audience comments and questions, and I thought I might just read a few of them because our audience is really engaged tonight, and we appreciate that. Colette Bodish says, we owe the past, present, and future the truth. We have evolved, and those statues are proof of our evolution, of how far we've come and how far we need to go. And so that's, I don't know if you want to respond to that or if you'd like me to read another.
Read a few more questions because we've already kind of touched on that. Read a few more statements in it.
Well, we've had a few that have talked about putting the statues in the museums, which we've touched on a little bit. Daniel Cotter writes, isn't there a long history of taking down statues, especially if we're here, the building was during Jim Crow? For example, in 1776, the Army and public tore down the statue of King George III in Lower Manhattan. We don't have any statues to the British Empire. Would you like to respond to that?
We do have statues to the British people in Central Park. I mean, they're great poets and people like that. They might not be actual, generals, but we have not erased our history. We have not erased our history with the British people,
There's a statue of Edmund Burke in Washington. I'm not sure I agree with the premise of that point.
And then we have another person who writes in and just, what you were talking about earlier with the slippery slope and just wants to know what is next and where does it end? And I think Dakare echoed those comments too. So
you mean what is next and where does it end in terms of taking down statues? And
down, right.
well, you know, this is, to me, the worrisome thing is that when you start looking at people like Jefferson, where you have, or George Washington for that matter, you have very complicated individuals who may, by the standards of their own time, have seemed a whole lot better than by the standards of our time, but that to whom we owe so much. It's, you know, part of being a civilized society is that we accept that flawed people produce partial achievements, and we hold on to those achievements and we build on them. I'm uncomfortable, and actually, Dakare, I wanted to, you when you say those statues have to come down, I think it's really important that there be a process by which that's decided. Not that some self-appointed arbiters of the truth come in and say, okay, those statues have to come down because we say so, because we are in possession of the truth. And even though half the people in this town, 70% of the people in this town don't agree, they have
well,
to
you know, in Charleston, I was referencing Charleston because here it was done the right way. The mayor
I
went to
agree.
the council
I agree.
and decided that, you know, John C. Calhoun was going to be taken down, and I don't know for sure if he's going to be put in a museum, but he was sawed off with the construction stuff.
Yeah.
And they picked it up, and you know, it wasn't like pulled off with somebody's pickup truck kind of thing.
No, and I completely approve of that being done. Yeah,
so I just, like I said, it can happen lawfully. I mean, the mayor can make that decision. In my opinion, there are people who say the mayor shouldn't be making decisions like that. It should be a federal thing. But I feel like it's, you know, it's a city, and the council can decide, and you can do a poll from your city. So, I mean, that's what people have been doing we did one for the mask mandate here in Charleston, and that passed. So I feel like there's ways that you can do it through the government. But like
Absolutely.
I said, people taking their pickup truck with rope is not the way.
Yeah.
I want to go to Tova here and let her ask a question. And that is something I've been curious about, because watching the defacement of the monuments and having them watching them be ripped down, and you know, and then set them on fire and lighting their cigarettes, and it was just this mob, and so many Americans are saying, wait a minute, where is the law? Where is justice? And I, not justice, but where's the law? I mean, justice is a whole other bag of worms, but where is the law? And so I want to go to Toba, but it is interesting for people to understand, because y'all are talking about local versus federal. And I don't think people really understand that. Like what I've gathered is that if it's a monument in DC, then the president, it's a federal thing, and the president can actually, but if it's in, say, Charleston or somewhere else, is it then the obligation of the city council? What are the regulations? Because sometimes nothing's being done, but they did put fences around the federal monuments in Washington, D.C., and they weren't torn down. And if you can just make that a simple, quick answer, because I will run out of time, and I want to make sure Tova gets to ask a question, and Cathy too, Professor McClay. But whose jurisdiction?
You're asking me that question. Okay, I'll be quick. I think it's primarily a local responsibility unless it's on federal land, and I think that these things should be decided by localities. You know, if Alexandria wants to remove the statue of who is it, that famous statue that they're fighting over all the time in Alexandria, but if they want to remove a Confederate statue, that's their decision to make. That's, I think, the right way to do it, but it has to be done in the right way.
But I'm talking about the law, you know, the aspect of if it's defacing property and tearing something down.
Oh, yeah, well, I think it depends. You know, it's not a federal offense if it's not on federal property, I don't think.
But is it local?
But if it's in a federal park, if it's in a national park or something like that, then I think federal.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
See, that's why we don't want mob passion in the country. And that's why the legislators and the mayors need to jump in, you know, and the city councils and do the town hall. You know,
Yeah.
It was so much fun on exposure because, you know, it took place in a small town in Alaska, and everyone would shuffle in their snow boots and their parkas and their hats, and we'd have the characters would have town hall meetings about whether to take something down or what to do. And that's part of it's a beautiful American process.
It is thoroughly American.
From the very, very beginning of our country, let's discuss this. And if we could say, hey, let's go discuss this. But when there's an absence of government from the people that have been elected, they're really negating that entire process. That's so beautiful, so American. They should be jumping in saying, don't deface it this way. Let's have a town hall. You know, everybody come on, let's discuss this. Let's do it the American way. That would just be so much better. Okay, Tova, go ahead.
So a couple of the comments touched on this, and I have just been wondering this. Do you see a problem in, I guess, altering the statues, not in like a irreversible way, but in a way that reflects the more updated view of the history? For example, maybe adding another plaque that addresses that, because my worry is, like, I imagine if I was like 10 years old and I'm just wandering in a park and I, you know, every day see a statue of someone who fought for the Confederacy or led the Confederacy, and if there's not that like updated understanding, I'd probably grow up thinking that, you know, without that nuanced view of American history. So do you think it would be helpful to include maybe plaques saying, you know, yes, this person did make some contributions, but also here's like a more comprehensive history of what they did? And then also, do you think we should, as a country, put up more monuments of maybe African-American heroes or other lesser known historical heroes as a way of presenting a more updated history? Because my worry is, I do think it's so important to honor history, but I think historically the people who've chosen who to honor have been a very specific subsect of society, and we haven't had a chance to honor all the Americans that have had an impact on our country. You know, we don't have nearly as many statues of you know, Harriet Tubman and, you know, those people who fought against slavery, I think, as we do with people who fought for slavery. So my question is, do you think that is maybe one way we could go about solving these issues, which is, you know, going back and not rewriting history, but looking back into history and bringing those people to light, and while also providing a more comprehensive information on those who have had major problems in their past who we honor today?
I think that's a good idea, and I think it is being done. I think in Maryland, for example, at the State House in Maryland, there's a big statue of Roger Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who wrote the Dred Scott decision. I grew up in Maryland, hung out in Annapolis a lot as a kid, a teenager, and I never understood why that was there. Well, is my understanding, is I haven't been back there in a while, but is that they have maybe it's Frederick Douglass, who of course was from Maryland. They have another statue. They haven't taken the Taney statue down, but they've added a counterpart, and I think that's a very good way of doing things, and it conveys the complexity of history. Let me give another example. I don't want to take up all the air here, but my wife and I were just in Santa Fe, and there's a plaza there that has a memorial to some of the cavalry that fought against Indians in that territory. And they've done something interesting. They didn't take it down, but they do have a sort of explanatory plaque of the kind, Toba, that you're describing. And they've chipped off some of the words so that where it said savages, for example, that's gone. And it's actually kind of effective. I'm sure there are people who hate it, but it's kind of effective in both telling you this is what they used to say, and And we don't say that now, but we want you to know that this is how they used to put it. I thought that was a kind of an interesting solution. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can alter and my wife just showed me an article. They removed the Tawny statue, so forget that. But bad example. But the Santa Fe example is kind of interesting.
But I like a lot what Tova and Dakare both. Like we should just elect them to office and they would fix everything. Tova, I liked what you said though, and I've heard the discussion about this, which is you put up statues. We need more statues of African American heroes. You know, more statues that of telling the whole entire story. And they were trying that with the Theodore Roosevelt statue. When I lived right around the corner in New York City, that it was in front of the History Museum. His father launched that museum. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt filled it with all of his things, but that it was offensive to a lot of people. So they did start putting plaques to explain, you know, wait, it really wasn't, the image isn't really meant to be this, but it's still, they're still taking it down. But that, I think that's a great idea about putting up more statues to honor the African American people. Cathy, and then let's go to Dakare because Dakare has his hand up. We have 10 minutes, so Cathy, go ahead, and then we'll make sure Dakare gets another question.
Okay. We've had a couple people in our audience who have noticed that today, I guess Mississippi has decided to change their flag and take the Confederate symbol off their flag. And then another audience member wrote in and asked that, noted that the swastika is banned in Germany because it was a symbol of the Holocaust, even though it was a symbol of much more, like regime, politics, etc. And asking, should the Confederate flag be banned even on a more broad basis than just in Mississippi, or do you think that it will be? Because it might evoke, or it may evoke similar emotions as the swastika for many in America. And what do you think about that, Professor McClay?
Oh, I think that what Mississippi did is appropriate and long overdue. And you know, there are still southern states. I think Georgia still has the Confederate battle flag as part of their flag, and South Carolina used to. I think they've changed that. But no, I think that's very, very bad and unnecessary and provocative. It's a way of sort of saying that the Southern effort didn't ever really go away, and that's exactly what you don't want to convey. So I completely agree with that. I'm glad they've done it in Mississippi, and I think that banning it in the same way the Germans banned the swastika is probably not a good idea. But that's a longer discussion. But I think, you know, that Nazism was not a product of a civil war. The Nazis, alas, came to power democratically, and they were the legitimate regime in a way. The Civil War was a sort of fight over legitimacy. It was a battle of brothers, and I think this is one of the reasons that I'm willing to make a bit of a defense for even the Jim Crow era monuments, because I think that allowing them, for the North allowing them, was a gesture towards national reunion at that time. Do we need that now? We don't have a whole lot of union, but it's not a North-South disunity. But that's one thing, just as a historian, I know that one of the ways you patch up a civil war is by allowing the losing side in some way to maintain some measure of dignity and face. It's just a fact. So that's one reason I'm not completely on the side of let's wipe them all out and do it yesterday.
It's really better, I think, in our country, that where instead of banning the Confederate flag, the people will do the right thing, and it'll be better that way. And that's actually what happening. People are taking the flag, they're doing the right thing. As soon as you ban it, there's going to be this huge,
Right.
rebellion against that. Because Dakare, you had your hand up earlier.
Well, I'm telling you, tonight is the night of Grammy sings. Another Grammy sing. She says, "Out of sight."
I hope she's watching.
Out of sight, out of mind. So I feel like I agree with what Mississippi did and these others. And I always think, not that the Confederacy is part of our history, but I don't want to fly the flag of the side that lost. Fly the American flag, So that's what I always think about. And like Professor said, some of that stuff, has to be there, but I don't think it has to be there. So, so it doesn't have to be so out there to where it's seen. So I definitely think the museum idea is our best bet when it comes to some of these statues that people are wanting down.
And let me just say that
town hall. And hall.
Let me just say that the thing about the Mississippi flag was it's the state flag. It's the official flag of the state. If some yokel wants to fly a Confederate flag in his backyard, it's America. Let him do it. It's idiotic, whatever, but let him do it. But it's a big difference when we're talking about the state government. That implies a kind of sanction for it that shouldn't be part of our society.
We're so happy to have trying to join us tonight is Miss Eboni Jenerette, who's Constituting America's 2019 We the Future Teacher Lesson Plan winner. And Eboni grew up in Spring, Texas, and attended Sam Houston State University, returned to her home district, Spring ISD, to teach 8th grade history. She was named the 2019 District Teacher of the Year and Twin Creeks Middle School Teacher of the Year for 5 years. Eboni has a love of history and feels that all students should be informed of who they are, where they come from, and how they hold the power to impact their own lives, both now and in the future. And Eboni had wanted to be on tonight to make a few comments, but she had some family situation come up she had to take care of. And so, Eboni, are you?
It's Kathy.
Hi.
I'm here. Hi, how are you? Hello, you guys. I am so sorry. I have a lot going on, but I just stepped out so that I could talk to you. I ended up just going to my car so that I could say hello and greet everybody and make sure that I wasn't flaky. But where were y'all at? I didn't know. I can make the same comments that I told you about earlier.
Do you want to just give maybe a 1 to 2 minute comment? We were just
absolutely. Okay. And I can turn that on. I just, when I spoke to Miss Cathy earlier, I was just saying how I believe that emotions are making the good people do bad things, or I feel like emotions are taking over people's actions. And I don't know if people are processing them all the way, but on one end, I understand the pain, the hurt. You feel like, hey, rip a statue down, it's gonna make you feel better for a moment, or do something violent and it's gonna make you happy for a second. But at the end of the day, you didn't resolve anything. So whatever your anger may have been, how did pulling the statue down address it? Did it get you what you wanted? Did it get you the job you desired? Like, what did you gain from doing that? And I'm not saying that they have no right to their emotions. I'm not saying people that are participating in these activities don't deserve some kind of gratitude, or I don't know exactly what they're seeking, but I believe there's a better way to do it. Like, I don't understand what are we truly gaining if we pull it down or if we rip something down. But on the other end, they are monuments, have some form of respect, but could we possibly maybe put them in a museum? That way, if you don't want to see it, you don't have to look at it every day if you feel as though somebody was hurt by you. On the other side, somebody that wants to see those statues, that wants to respect the people that are being built up. If you put in a museum or something of the nature, somebody could walk in and say, hey, look at this. Hey, look at that. Look at what this person did. And it's not in somebody's face. I guess my biggest thing is listening to each other and finding a happy medium so that all can function in our country to make us work as one. Finding something that brings us together. Finding something that, okay, you don't like this idea. I don't like this idea. How can we function as a country, as a people, even if we have different ideas and thoughts over the different things going on in America. So that was my biggest thing. It's okay to think differently. It's okay to be different than what your race is. And I told them earlier, not to say anything negative, I told Miss Cathy earlier, I said, hey, you know, I'm an African American, and sometimes it's hard for me because I feel as though I don't have the same, not anger, just the same mindset as many other people that are upset and want to protest and do different things. I don't have that. And I was talking to her saying, it's okay to think differently. It's okay to be separated from everybody that people would assume a group you would go into. But just honestly, I want to speak to you all about finding a way to help us all function and help us get through this. I mean, it affects everybody. So just finding a happy medium amongst us all was all I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to take too much of y'all's time, but I did want to make sure I made it before it was over.
That was great.
Eboni, I know you've had a long night, and I'm so grateful that you joined us and said those wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
As well as Professor McClay has been wonderful too. And you know, I think the consensus here, at least, you know, is that we have these incredible founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, that give us the opportunity to come together, to have town halls, to use our we the people, you know, who form a more perfect union, and
yes,
we can come through our government to negotiate with one another, to have a civic conversation with one another. And in that respect, then everyone can feel happy about the situation. And it's done the way our founding fathers wanted it to be done, which is with a methodical, slow, civil conversation, civic, you know, a common sense. And in the long run, and we talk about this with Constituting America, because we really, with our George Washington speaking, they would teach the kids how to write a petition. So let's write down a petition about what you really, really want. And I think you said that, Eboni, tonight. What is it, Dakare, you too, you know, what do you want? You know, let's learn to ask for what we really want out of this situation. And let's do it with our First Amendment rights and within the bounds of the law. And let's write a petition and write it out exactly what we need. And then go to our representatives and let's get the machine working. And then once again, I will say that I think our Democrats and Republicans owe it to the American people to listen to what everyone's saying and actually find a bill that works. Wouldn't it be great if they could find a bill that works before the election? Because
Tova and I are writing one right now, Janine. Tova and I are going to write one right now.
Okay, good. Y'all write the petition. And if only our representatives in DC could come up with a solution before the election, wouldn't that be great? Instead of continuing to use this divide for political gain, they're perpetuating this whole situation. So, but we the people can step up and say, you're not doing it the right way. You need to listen to us, and we want you to do, because if they won't do it through the legislative process, they leave a void. And when they leave a void, people feel like, Eboni, you were talking about, and everyone here tonight, that they've got to do something. They feel powerless, so I got to do something because no one's listening. So it's this process of all of us coming together as Americans, and then our representatives doing what they're supposed to be doing. I hope you'll come back, Eboni. We can continue to talk about this discussion. And Professor McClay, you were wonderful, and Eboni, you were wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, I feel so badly that all this happened today, but I was gonna try my absolute hardest to make it. Absolutely, I was gonna be here. I was gonna make it. I was going to make it.
We'll have you come back on again, okay?
Absolutely.
Can I just say, Eboni, I loved what you said. It was marvelous.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much. It truly was just what was running through my mind, and I just wanted to make sure that somebody heard, hey, it's okay. Let's figure out a situation. Let's figure out something greater than just tearing things up, because you're not getting anything out of that. you're tearing it down and you're in the same position. What can we do to work towards getting us some form of a result? But yeah, that was my 2 pieces. That was my little piece.
Yeah, amen.
Thank you guys so much. Anytime you need me, please reach out. I promise. I'm so sorry this happened the way it did. But anything you guys need, y'all have a wonderful evening.
We'll keep you in our thoughts and prayers.
Perfect. Thank you guys.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching.